economic development progresses, that one meeting a month isn't gonna cut it in every instance. Now, we don't have enough business yet for 2 meetings a month, but we've gotta develop the flexibility to have that second meeting planned out. Because sometimes our calendars get overloaded, and it's not fair to the public, and it's not fair to the developer, and it's not fair to the commission, much less the taxpayers. And so that's what we're getting to, anticipating future demand and future growth. So, we're asking that staff consider a second date of availability in any given month if they can find it far enough out. So that as agendas fill up, we have a fallback alternative. All too often, a development gets rushed through at the last minute, and then it's an unfair and burdensome issue to this commission and sometimes to the developer if they don't get the answer they're looking for.
We will do our best to, that won't happen at your next meeting. This alternative date for your October 1st is a doable. The other one it's gonna take us a little bit longer to work
Okay.
through those issues.
Well.
And those challenges, but it is on our to-do list for
All right.
you.
Well, what we'll do is we'll take this under advisement. We don't need to actually vote on this. This is recommended, and we're happy to review and consider it and ask staff to begin that process of identifying a proposed second date. I think within a year or 2 years, we're gonna need to have that regimented in.
Yes, sir.
And we're not quite there yet, but we're certainly getting there.
Well, just know that what this does is it puts these on the event
Yes.
calendar. So that these dates are locked in, you have the city council chambers, and, what you'll also see is, this also gives you, this is our internal deadlines for when applications have to be submitted.
Yes, we noticed that. That
and
was very
all
good.
of those things, because
Pardon the dumb question, but
Yes,
what
sir.
are the titles?
it's the, I'll let the city attorney answer that question. What is the titles, Jennifer?
What is the due date?
Remember how it says here, when I have to get you the titles?
Oh, okay. So for publication purposes, we do require titles to be submitted for review and approved by the city attorney before they are published. So, anything referencing titles would be the deadline just for the title. The legislation would be, brought forth at a later time for, I believe, about a week after the titles are due is when, the final, legislation is approved.
Explain what this is.
So for example, in your agenda packet, the language that is all in bold, all in caps, that's your title. And if you go even further and look at your legislative item, your actual resolution, it's simply the title to your resolution. This is what gets published in the newspapers and what the public gets to see.
And the
Okay.
reason that's so far in advance is because the shorter time frame, the more cost it is to publish.
And the greater the chance of error.
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Questions?
Just on the May 7th is not city election night? I believe it is.
We may have a runoff the following,
Yeah, the runoff's 2 weeks after.
May some of the, we have to look into for the city clerk, because usually a runoff too.
So we've got 2 dates at least that need to be amended here on this. Okay.
And we'll work toward getting those addressed.
Yeah, we
Okay.
would need to certainly know the May
Election night.
meeting by next month if you can.
We have
Yes,
to, because of the timing.
yeah.
Do we have, for November, my calendar, it shows, election day off year. Do we have anything that we know of for November the 5th in Florida?
No.
Any kind of primaries or anything else, county elections, or?
Is that election time?
Because I show it on my calendar, it says off year, November the 5th.
But again, that would not affect the use of the chamber here at City Hall. The May 7th election would affect having the chamber available.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, November 2020 will be the big one. Okay. All right. Well, then I think we've got that worked out. That's very good. Thank you, Ms. Love. Appreciate that. All right, we have no continued public hearings, so now we go to item 5, public hearing, PC 1-19. A resolution of the mayor and city council approving a development agreement and substantially the attached form between the city of North Miami and Causeway Village LLC for the property located at 1850 Northeast 123rd Street and legally described with Miami-Dade County Folio Number 06-2228-001-0270 to set forth the terms, provisions, and conditions necessary to encourage a stronger commitment to comprehensive and capital facilities planning in connection with the development, ensure the provision of adequate public facilities for the development, and reduce the economic cost of the development in a manner that is consistent with and furthers the goals, objectives, and policies of the City of North Miami Comprehensive Plan, and in accordance with the provisions of Article 3, Divisions 2 and 13 of the City of North Miami Code of Ordinances, Land Development Regulations, LDR, further authorizing the city manager to take all actions necessary to finalize and execute the development agreement, and providing for an effective date and for all other purposes. Staff report, please. Oh, by the way, Mr. McDermott, you need to step down, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Mr., our city attorney needs,
Right.
our commissioner
So-
attorney needs to speak.
Good evening. We should treat this as a quasi-judicial item because we're granting development rights to a single property. So the only thing different would be we would swear everybody in, and if there are disclosures to make of prior communications with either the public or applicant, you should disclose those now.
Does Mr. McDermott have a stated conflict on this?
Yes, I have a conflict. and I
Yeah,
have to
he should
recuse
recuse himself. That's a
Okay.
separate issue.
That's a separate.
Okay.
So you can go.
So,
Just to clarify conversations and the like, we've been dealing with this project for quite some time and had
for
an
years.
abundance of, an
Yes.
abundance of meetings where
Right,
there's
so
been,
if you have no new contacts since the last,
that's fine. That's,
I would just state that there's no new
understand.
communications since the last meeting. That-
Well, I have
at
had no
which this was heard.
communication since the last meeting on this one, so,
and I have had none.
Okay.
I have none. Same here.
okay.
Okay.
Then let's move
So,
forward.
everybody who intends to speak, to provide testimony to the board, and if you're attorney, you don't need to be sworn unless you are providing testimony. So do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in these proceedings?
Yes.
Is your hand raised, ma'am?
Yes,
And did you say yes?
yes.
Thank you. Yes? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Staff report, please.
Yes, sir. For the record, Debbie Love, City Planner. This item, as you well know, has been traveling quite some time. This is the next step in this process. Can we get the PowerPoint up on the screen, please? Thank you. All right, so let me make sure I have it turned the right way. I usually do this backwards. There we go. This is actually, at this level now, you're going to be recommending approval or denial of the resolution that governs the development agreement. Because it is in the PCD, that's how it is, units are issued. There's the location, it's at that 1850 Northeast 123rd. For the public, you could see the location. It's a little over 4 acres. The zoning is currently C2BE. As we've gone through the future land use map amendment, that was actually adopted, which came before you all. City Council adopted that on 9/25. The zoning map amendment came before you all in November 14th meeting, and it is been approved on first reading in December. It's going for second reading next week, and assuming that it is adopted. There's a period of a little slight waiting period before it actually becomes effective. Again, this is for that development that Sam showed you. The restrictions are in the development agreement, which mirror the restrictive covenant. It's a slight difference in that the development agreement is governed by Florida statute. We also have some things in our code So it's treated like you would, it's the same type of a mechanism used for very large scale developments, like developments of regional impact. In this case, it's going to restrict the units from the 500 potential, over 500 potential, to 297 dwelling units. It's going to include a cap, the same cap on, and this is important, it's going to include a cap on the amount of retail restaurant space. Whereas, as of right, there is no cap. They can develop, because we do not have a floor area ratio, they can fill the building. So this is an important limitation that they are giving.
But you're gonna run out of parking.
Correct, sir. So it's a limited
Because the
by
parking, I was gonna ask you when you get to that, the parking number is some reduction in the total number added together.
Yes, sir,
So I think we did a shared parking calculation
Yes,
or
sir.
what have you.
right.
But if you don't cap the retail, and there's another 10,000 square feet of retail, you're way short of parking.
Well, and that's where the development agreement has really nothing to do with that aspect. But when they come back, if they come back to want more, because right now it's 487 parking spaces that they are saying that they're going to provide, and that's under the shared parking. Now, the term of this agreement was run consecutive, the same amount as the restrictive covenant, 30 years, which is the maximum that Florida statute allows. It says up to 30 years. And the applicant has proffered that in order to increase that density or intensity, they would have to apply, be approved as a supermajority vote by city council. So that would mean that they would have to adjust their parking, they would have to add more whatever is required in order to do that, including the density intensity. So, right now it's tied to the size of that building and the site. So they're capping that 15,481, and they're capping the residential dwelling units, but if they come back and want to increase either one, they have to apply, we have to then review it, we have to determine, do you need more parking, how much more parking are you gonna need, and then they would have to make that parking adjustment. And again, that's through a super majority vote.
So why wouldn't we leave the development agreement with the max, with the cap on the retail?
No, we are leaving it right now, that's what they're
Because
maxing
the cap,
out.
I mean, I'm gonna ask the question in a bit about the calculation on the parking. Because I think the parking was all done with retail only designations. You don't have any restaurant designations. Because a restaurant designation requires more parking spaces.
It says could include restaurants.
It could include the restaurants, and so that when they did their calculations, if you look in your plan,
'Cause I didn't, okay, couldn't read that.
Yeah.
My eyes aren't that good.
that's okay, sir.
But the,
Feel bad, neither do mine.
Yeah, they,
because it said retail, which may include,
right, but when they submitted their, traffic analysis, they had a calculation, my apologies, I didn't bring that with me. They were calculating 5,149 square feet of restaurant. So their parking was based upon 5,000 square feet of restaurant of that 15,000. And then the remaining is retail of some sort. So,
because
sorry, sir, go right ahead.
I won't even, it's hopeless for me to try to read the size print. So that's based upon 5,000 square feet of restaurant,
about 5,100 square feet of restaurant.
5,100 square feet of restaurant, and 10,300 square feet plus of retail space.
Correct, sir.
Okay.
So effectively, if we wanna eat at the restaurant, we should take our bicycle. That's what we're implying.
Well, I just want
correct.
you to realize that any new development in the city has to provide bike parking,
Unless the city builds it.
unless the city. We're gonna make them do that too. Any new development, they are not exempt, we are not exempt. So the next step to this, will be getting final DRC site plan approval. We had our first DRC meeting with them today, a review process today. They have some things that they need to address, but they're well on their way to addressing things like featuring architecture, some stormwater, you know, those type of things. So we plan to have it appear at the city council on their 1/22 meeting for final site plan approval. At that time, they will have a final site plan that's been stamped, approved, that met all the criteria for the DRC. So with that, I believe the applicant would like to make a brief presentation or have a few words to say.
All right, does the applicant wish to add anything at this time?
Repeat that, please, Mr. Chair.
Does the applicant wish to?
It's your turn.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed first.
We're opening
You
the
said
door,
wish
Mr.
to.
Geller. Yes,
Okay.
you don't have to. We're just,
We'll be brief.
I understand. That's all members of the bar always say they'll be brief,
We have to. It's
Yeah.
in the code.
of course.
Thank you and good evening and Happy New Year to everybody, to council and staff and to members of the Planning Commission. We appreciate the opportunity to be before you. We have the architect present with us, Mr. Font, my colleague Carla Jones, and of course, Mr. and Mrs. Irwin and Laura Tauber are here. You've heard about this project. You've approved this project. Council's approved this project. It's moving forward. Tonight, we're here to do something that is required under your code. We have to have a development agreement. Having a development agreement is something the city requires because the city views it as being in the city's interest. So we have no difficulty with that, as was highlighted by Ms. Love. What we've done basically is agree to what the city has asked. The city has asked that we do certain things, and we've done them. They involve our paying for sidewalk improvements. They involve us doing things necessary to provide not only sidewalk improvements, but to make the place pedestrian-friendly. There is a specific provision that we provide both pedestrian and bicycle linkages that we are agreeing to, happy to do, but required to do.
May this be a model going forward for everything that we do in the city.
We hope so, we hope so. And it involves the city paying also approximately $27,000, it's the estimated cost, for those sidewalk, pedestrian, bicycle improvements, and paying $100,000, $25,000 a year for a 4-year period for the traffic impact fee program. Specifically, this is apart from what are typically called impact fees. This is specific to this project. My understanding is that the city, while it has discretion as to how it's going to use that money, some of it or all of it, and I defer to your staff, will be used for some kind of a circulator kind of minibus or something like that. Again, I defer to your staff. We're paying for it. There's nothing in here that the city is paying for pursuant to the development agreement. It's all us. And we're happy to do it. This is what we were asked. This is what we're doing. If there are specific questions, we'd be happy to respond to them. That's why both Mr. Font and my colleague Ms. Jones are present. But the bottom line is, we were asked to do this and we're required to do it. We are doing it gladly. We want this project to move forward. We expect this development agreement to move to the council at the same time that the site plan approval does, once we're through DRC. This is binding. It is binding on us for a 30-year period, the same period of time that the restrictions we've already offered. All of these terms, especially the financial ones, were contained in the declaration of restrictive covenants that we've already proffered, and you, as well as the council, have already accepted. So this basically memorializes all that and puts it in the form which the city's requested. It's really that simple. And unless there are questions, that will conclude our presentation.
members of the commission have a question for Mr. Geller?
Yes, sir.
One question, Mr.
Good evening,
Ernst.
Mr. Geller.
Good
Just as a
evening, sir.
follow-up, the conversation we had at the last meeting regarding the transportation element.
Yes, sir.
Section 9.
I recall well.
Dealing with the Florida Department of Transportation
Yes, sir.
with regards to traffic signaling in that particular area. I don't know how much the city would be involved with it, but I'm sure you would probably be the one that would have to reach out, your development,
Yes, sir.
to deal with the Department of Transportation as to solving this problem, and
Yes, sir.
also with your neighbor across the street because of conflicting, or not, but sharing exit and entry points along that stretch of road.
It is my understanding that those discussions are well underway with FDOT. This agreement specifically provides that we are to cooperate with FDOT as far as what they're asking in order to be sure that the transportation element of the comprehensive plan of the city of North Miami is addressed, and that what is going to happen there on this state road is what is required both by your comp plan and by the Florida Department of Transportation. Contact has already been made. We're obligated to do that by this agreement specifically, and there's also the expectation that the $100,000 a year that we're paying, $25,000 a year over 4 years consecutively, will also be used to address some of the concerns that exist under the comprehensive plan. That's why it's up to the city to determine how that's spent. But your point, as we discussed at the end of that meeting, it is a specific requirement of this development agreement.
Thanks, sir.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Chair will call for a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Reach, second
Second.
by,
Can I just, talk about, to approve this? So we are at the 15,481 square feet of retail space.
minor point.
Okay.
All right, we jumped the gun on the motion. We'll open a public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak to this is invited to come forward. And no one's out there, therefore the public hearing is closed. Again, the chair calls for a motion to approve.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Reach, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Ernst. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, let the record reflect it's unanimous in support as a quasi-judicial hearing, 4-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Sorry you guys had to wait for the other
Happy New Year,
staffers,
guys.
but we appreciate your courtesy.
Thank you.
And there being no other business to come before the
Kevin,
planning
I
commission?
have a
Yes,
issue I gotta bring up,
all right, go ahead.
and I believe it was, and I couldn't contact you guys individually, but I had a conversation with Debbie Love, and I was looking at the land use map, and I think it was back in April that we did text amendments to the land use map, and it didn't reflect when we were talking about Emerald Drive. Originally, on the one map, it shows that the university can go 110 feet, and the property owners can only go 55 feet. And if you guys remember me bringing this up, and everybody around that neighborhood, Venice Lane, Venice Park Drive, across the street on Northeast 16th Avenue, they can all go 110 feet. South of Emerald Drive can go 110 feet. Well, and we had approved a text amendment to change it where not only the university can go 110 feet, but the property owners on Emerald Drive can go
Sure.
110 feet. I don't know if you'll remember that.
I do.
And I think that was the night that, Mr. Heller, we had our ethics training, if you recall. I could be off on that.
remember.
Well, anyway, I looked at the original map, and it showed that we could go to 55 feet. Well, and speaking of Ms. Love, a few weeks ago, we went over the map again, and much to my amazement, it showed that the university could go 110 feet, but the properties that are on Emerald Drive, and only on Emerald Drive, have to remain the same. In other words, if a building gets damaged for some reason, a fire or some other catastrophic event takes place, that property owner has to rebuild the building exactly as it is right now. And I don't know where this got lost in translation, but I do recall that we on this board approved it, and somehow, it never got to its final,
Was that approval ever submitted, that recommendation ever submitted to the city council?
and that's where I like to find out, and I think we have to do the research, because one map, the older map, shows that, well, okay, the university can go 110 feet, we can go 55 feet, the rest of the properties. Then we changed it to make it equal for everybody, and somehow that got lost in translation. And in fact, if anything, it made it more restrictive on the properties that are on Emerald Drive, which is grossly unfair.
What do we need to do to rectify that?
Well, the challenge here is that some of these parcels are owned by the university. Residential outside of student housing is not allowed in the PU district, which is what this is. So the residential that are not student housing are legal non-conforming. So they can't go higher. They can't go as high as the university, because that's an allowable permitted use. So they can go up higher. These residential dwelling units can't, because they're lawfully non-conforming, and you can't expand the non-conformity. The challenge, as Mr. Each and I talked, is that they may own, the university may own like 3 parcels down here, 1 parcel in the middle, and so you'd end up with spot zoning by changing it. You can't do that. And so how that was addressed, I can't speak to, because the future land use map it reflects this. It comports with the zoning map. So
Would an overlay district for that street be appropriate in order to have uniformity of building heights?
Yeah.
well,
It would be a narrowly construed overlay district, it would only, but you can't allow the university to build 110 and not let the house next to it go up to the same height.
right, and that's the conversation that we had, as to why you can't rezone it, and why you can't change the future
Well,
land use map.
What I'm confused on was it says PU 55 feet / 110 for the university.
Right.
So at one time, those properties could go up 55 feet and the university go up 110 feet. And that's the way it was construed for all of these years when I would talk to planning about it.
And that's not the case, because
And
residential is
this absolutely, there's
non-conforming.
no rhyme or reason to this, it's just, it's befuddled me.
I totally hear what you're saying, and as you and I talked, outside of student housing, there is no residential allowed in PU. But because it's student housing, that's a permitted use, so it's not non-conforming. Those lots that are owned by the university, they can expand, they can go up to 55 or 110 feet, because they're not non-conforming.
Through you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Well, what's wrong with an overlay district? I mean, we've used those before. It just doesn't make, I mean, there's gotta be logic somewhere in all of this. And it just doesn't make sense that, you know, one lot, because it's owned by somebody else, can have a different height restriction than another one. It just doesn't, logically, it just doesn't make sense. So, like everything else in life, there has to be a solution. Okay, so what about an overlay district? You know, and there's probably other areas around the university, you know, that you'd want to do something like that anyway.
If you look here on the map, I don't know that anybody can see that at the public
No,
level.
I can't see, it's too small.
But you see all of this green here?
Mm-hmm.
These are all parcels of land that are not owned by the university. They actually have houses on them. So because at some point in time, somewhere, these were envisioned to be actually owned or to be purchased by something, either by the city or for some other use. But right now, all of that is also PU, but they're residential dwelling units, and I've actually had to tell people the sad news that they can't put an addition on their house because they're expanding the nonconformity. So going back to your question about an overlay, we'd have to have a city council member actually sponsor that to move forward. How we go about that, I'm going to defer to your council as to the best approach to that. But I can tell you that,
Well, may I ask you a question?
We
How
may-
about what happened to the motion that we made here that night, back in, I believe it was April? What happened to that? That never got to the city council?
Probably included in the recommendations.
Did it ever get there? I mean, or
Yeah,
did it just
it's
drop
part of
off?
it's part of the staff report, the recommendations are included.
we always include those in.
Yeah.
Well, I think the answer is what Debbie said, Kenny. We have to get a,
I
obvious,
understand that, Mike, but I'm talking about, Debbie wasn't here then, I believe,
Nixon was here.
Nixon was here. And I believe that was supposed to go forward to the city council to even it off. Why didn't it go to the city council?
Well, I don't think that,
That's my
I don't think
question.
it
Why did it not go to the city council?
Well, we don't know whether it did or not,
Thank you.
okay? We don't know
Well,
whether.
let's find out then. I
Well,
mean, that's,
Kenny, we don't know whether it went to the city. What we need to do is kindly ask Debbie to research this and see, because it may have gone to the city council, and maybe they turned it down.
I don't recall it going to.
Well, we don't, Kenny, we don't know. We need to find out the facts of what the situation is. So, through you, Mr. Chairman, if I might, ask Debbie to research this and see, you know,
Did-
what happened to
And
that.
also research the merits of an overlay district as a fix to this.
Right, and I think that really is really the answer. And the ultimate answer is, Kenny, is we're gonna have to get, whether it went to them or not, or they didn't understand it, or they didn't have time and it got pushed back, whatever it is. Ultimately, a city council person has to make a recommendation that an overlay be created to address this issue.
I
And,
told-
and, wait a minute, and if you'll recall, way back when the university, and I may be mistaken, but when the university originally had their master plan, okay, years and years and years ago, they encompassed that all being, remember that?
I'm quite familiar with that. I'm quite familiar with the update that we did. And it was a very simple process that we brought up here to even off everything else, because
Well,
the way it was, let's go back.
It appears the council never voted on it, at
It
least not in
was-
that
well,
way.
No, it was, the residents could go 55 feet and the university could go 110 feet. That's the way it was explained, and that's the way it shows on the map.
No, and no,
Right
no,
here,
s-
here,
no,
I'll show
sir.
you the old map,
Unfortunately,
and that's the
it's
way
the
it was explained
permitted
to me.
uses. It has nothing to do,
What's the 55/110 mean then?
all right. You can go up to, depending upon if you are a permitted use, 55 feet is generally the maximum that's allowed in PU for structures when they're adjacent to certain, development areas. An example is that, most of the PU, the max is 55 feet. But if you are in the NRO and you're PU, or you are a community facility that's lawfully conforming, you can go up to a higher height.
You see, the advantage, that always presumed that
PD3 was
those were
110.
separated
Yeah,
from
but she's talking about PU.
the individual parcels, but now we've
PU.
got this sawtooth arrangement, where you've got a piece here and a piece there, and the next to that is another piece, and you're gonna wind up with this tremendous inconsistency,
Yeah, so
whereas
that's why I
This
think
was
an
it right here.
overlay's
This
gonna
is
work.
the
I mean,
house.
Debbie,
That's it right there.
listen, you have a lot of experience with this, and I have,
It's all along
I
the
have
lake.
a little bit, and you
Yeah,
have a little bit,
and
okay?
55,
So,
110.
assuming that, don't you think that ultimately an overlay would be the way to really address this?
Well,
Ultimately, because it doesn't make any sense to have one piece of property go so high and the very next door can't. And, you know,
and Emerald Lake Drive is a very short drive. There isn't that much to it, but
And I think there's
20 years out, if it was all developed to 110 feet with that lake on the other side, that would be very valuable property.
right, and you have ways through the ordinances to prevent any kind of massive, whatever you want to call it, happening there. There are ways to put restrictions in place that don't allow ugliness, so to speak. But, you know, and I'm sure that there's other areas around there that creating an overlay would also help address from the university standpoint, I would think, maybe.
Well,
But anyway, I think we need at least.
I need to look
this-
at that.
We need to look at that, yes. I mean, Kenny's right. I mean, we have addressed this on many different occasions. And I think the way to do it is to, let's figure out what we can do that's gonna be the best solution for all concerned.
All parcels there should be equal in height.
Right.
Now, when I look at this old map,
Regardless of who owns it, we need to clean it up one way or the other.
I mean, I look at this, the map
Right,
from
that's what I wanted to
years
know.
ago, is there a date on here? I don't see it.
Remember now, it's the use, it's what's permitted.
Right.
So if you say that residential is a permitted use within this overlay, and I'm just gonna use that without doing my research with council right now, is then that takes that nonconformity away.
Didn't-
Now, the residential component, then you would have to say, for residential, there would be a 35-foot height limit or a 55-foot limit or something, because otherwise you'd get massive height on parcels that are, maybe not, made to do
Well,
that.
nothing wrong with a 110-foot
Wait,
mansion, you
th-
know,
th-
it could be
th-
very
Exactly.
narrow and tall.
But I can't talk, I can only talk generalities right now
Yeah.
without getting into the
Right.
research
Well,
part of it.
That's what the original map reflected, 55/feet and then 110 feet for the university. And every time I went into the planning department, they told me that, yeah, you can go up 55 feet. And then what brought this issue to my, before us up here, was I'm looking at Venice Lane, Venice Park Drive, everybody on the west side of Northeast 16th Avenue, all the way down to 123rd Street. They can go sky's the limit, but the people on Emerald Drive, not only could they not go, but the university could go, the sky's the limit. But again, what happens is now, we're really in a box.
Let's,
Well, it's inconsistencies, but I think we could go on forever talking about it.
Yeah.
So perhaps maybe we could just sort of, if you could come back and let's have a starting point to work from, you know?
I think the
makes sense.
planning commission will be quite agreeable in supporting Commissioner Reacher's position. I don't think
Right.
there's gonna be any opposition here on that. And we would make another unanimous recommendation, again, to forward it back to city council. The question is the vehicle. And if an overlay district on Emerald Drive is the solution, then we need to pursue that.
What I will do is I will check with the university, because I'm sure that was not their intention.
No, I'm sure it wasn't either,
And,
you know, and, I mean, I see nothing wrong with a 110-story fraternity house, you know?
well, and they really have done a nice job. over
They
there.
have.
Well,
And
can I
we-
switch the subject for a second so we could maybe leave today?
Sure, if
One-
you want to go home.
Two things happened tonight. We were looking at the economic development plan, and we were looking at calendars. And there's a couple of things I'd like to figure out how we get on the calendar. We've talked about this before. We had done definitions with parking and height, and there was town hall meetings which went wherever they went, and those were months ago.
The ordinances are in the works.
So those were a couple of months ago. And those need to get on the calendar. That's it's a problem, and that's why they need to be defined.
They
Second-
will be on the calendar
Okay.
shortly.
Secondly, we had talked in the past about, within the LDRs, the bonuses that we provide. And the bonuses that we provide are outdated and antiquated, and they're based upon what should be table stakes now for developers to do. And we should look at changing that to more 21st century bonuses. If we're gonna give you something, we should get something back, other than bike racks, which you're supposed to put in anyway, with all
Exactly.
deference to bike racks.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think we need more bike racks and more open spaces.
That's
Well,
actually
they
been,
should be
that's actually
put
been
in, and
done.
they're not a
It's actually been
bonus
done
item.
now. What we are working on now is getting the feedback from, the council members on what we're proposing, because instead of having a bonus table for NRO, a bonus table for the PD, and a bonus table for outside of the NRO, you have enough option that while it's the NRO, you're capped at 90. At the PCD, you're capped at whatever, but it is following your recommendation and the thing that you had looked at before. But we've expanded it now to allow it to cover many other things that we think for sustainability and resiliency, because that's going to be the focus of the city, at my department for 2019 is resiliency and sustainability. So that will be coming forward. I just can't tell you the exact date for that.
I'd just like to do something as opposed to continuing to tweak it and expand it and define it. I mean, we need, there's some things we just need to address.
Yes, sir, it's
And
happening, it's happening, sir.
speaking of things to address, as you look at the growth in the city, and we look at Solomia coming online, and there's 5,000, whatever the number is, of units that will be built there. There's the transit district that's built on 151st Street, and there's gonna be a lot going on Plain there. And as you look at the charter of the city, the planning commission's charged with looking at council districts and how those should be apportioned. And we're supposed to start the conversation. I don't know what the process has been in the past. All I know is that by the charter, we're supposed to look at that, and as I look at if I go up on the drone and fly over the city, I see District 1, for example, about to get a whole lot of population on the north end that doesn't currently exist. And you look at some other developments that are taking place, and whatever the logic was for dividing the 4 districts where they're divided, because when you look at where they're divided, you go, somebody was either sitting over a big bottle of scotch one night and drawing these lines, or there was something that caused them to go there.
Yeah, there was,
And,
Yes.
but in any case, the numbers are moving around. And at some point, we should figure out how we are supposed to initiate that process.
What process, of changing the districts or of?
Increasing the number of
What's, not
districts.
increasing the number of the districts, I'm not going there, it's how the districts are divided.
Well, yeah, I was here when we went to districts.
Council people.
Yes.
I don't think, I don't think we're empowered to change it just.
No, we're not empowered to change it, but we're charged with beginning the process.
Right.
The city charter says the planning commission is charged with initiating that process.
It was
By-
based
by-
upon population, there was a couple other things that I
Probably.
have to, I got some,
And that's my point. The population numbers are changing within the districts.
By the way, we are having a charter board meeting on the 9th.
on the 9th? Okay.
9th of January.
Yes.
Okay, charter board meeting. Well, that's an interesting issue because we're basing it on the census every 10 years. And so how do we forecast from the 2020 census to 2030 census and the impact that might have? Because these housing units aren't going to be occupied by 2020, but they'll certainly be occupied by 2030.
Well,
And it's that next decade that would then make a difference in the apportionment issue.
Well, generally speaking, you can calculate your proposed population projection based upon census. That'll give you 2.1 people per household. And so when I do when planners do population projections, we generally look out to see if there was a trend, or if there is a big land use plan amendment that actually increases density and intensity, or density in a specific area. So we take all of that into consideration, but we generally use the census saying, right now it's established at 2.51 persons per household, and so we'll just plot that out for the population projections. Economists do it this magic box things that they use. We try to do just a straight line just to give us ourselves a general idea.
We're only doing it on population, right? We don't look at demographics, we don't look at,
Well, you wouldn't want to do it on demographics, because then it's almost what they call redlining then.
right.
So you want to stay away from the redlining. It's generally based upon population that they do districting.
Well,
But that's not,
effectively,
that's
if I-
outside of my purview, and that's really
If
what
I
your
dare to come out and say
commission
this,
and council is dealing with.
I'm going to dare to go out and say this. When Solomia is sold out, it would be large enough to warrant its own city council member district, based on almost 5,000 household units. You see,
Thus,
One of the reasons
point.
this districts came about in this city, we were at large. There was a couple of things that had taken place. I think back in this, the mayor used to be able to do a 4-year term, and that changed back in the 70s. And most of the representation of the city came from the east side. Keystone, Sans Souci, those were the elected officials. And that was historically the way it worked. And then the west side was complaining because they never got a person on the council. I think there was a young lady, I forget her name, back in the 70s or the 80s, was the only one. Then I remember earlier on, back in the early 70s, Bob Huff came from the west side, a few other people came from the west side. But as we progressed into the 80s, it was always on the east side, Sans Souci and Keystone. So that's when they decided back in the 90s to go to district elections. And that's how they divided everything up, with District 1 being the west side, and District 2 being the middle of the city, and 3 and 4 being the east. I'm sorry, 1 and 2 being the east side, and
Right.
3 being the middle of the city, and District 4 being the west side.
well, we're gonna see that Solomia by 2030 will be entitled to its own city council district. So I've gone there. Mike. I went
2030.
there. Let's be candid. 5,000
I'll
houses.
be in a
units.
wheelchair by 20.
Yeah. All right, well, we can't do anything more with that. Let us know about this overlay district if we can for, Kenny's area. That's a valid point. It's another one of these hole in the donut things that we've sort of been overlooking, and we need to try and get that lined up if we can.
By the way, Mr. Chairman, before I move to adjourn, I'd like to recognize Officer DeJesus in the back. You know, he's always there, and he just stands there and as patient as can be while we just ramble on. So we appreciate the officer's presence and your patience, and you know, it's the pardon? So anyway, just to recognize the fact that you're here and that we appreciate your being here, we really do. And he hangs out in the parking lot until we all get ready to go home, so, you know.
All right, thank you very much for that, Officer
And motion to
DeJesus.
adjourn.
All right, by the way, under Robert's rules, do we actually need a motion to adjourn? We do.
So I made it.
Does it need to be seconded and voted on, or just made?
Second.
All right. Motion
any other
adjourned by
motion.
Mike, seconded by Kenny. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you and good night.